Welcome to the Duckpin Podcast with your host, Brian Griffiths. And now, here's Brian.
As you know by this point, Tribune Publishing has closed their deal to sell their holdings to Alden Capital. Now, this includes our local papers here in the Maryland, Baltimore region, the Baltimore Sun Media Group, which includes the Baltimore Sun, includes the Carroll County Times, and the paper for which I write for a column for them, the Capital in Annapolis. Now, obviously, when you watch this, my opinions are my own. I'm a freelance columnist. I am not carrying water for capital management. I am not carrying water for Alden. I am not carrying water, certainly, for the Baltimore Sun Guild. What you're hearing here are my thoughts as a matter as a longtime consumer of the Baltimore Sun Media Group and their papers, as somebody who, yes, does write a column for them, but also somebody who wants to make sure that we have good, strong local media here in the Baltimore region. Now, I have long stated a preference for local ownership of the Baltimore Sun and the Baltimore Sun Media Group. Local ownership of any business makes it better suited to serve the community, and that's nowhere more visible than when you're talking about local media. When you have groups from outside of the area coming in and dictating policy about media, who's going to cover something, who is going to be in charge, how media is going to be presented. A cookie cutter solution, a solution proposed by a consultant, it does not fit all. Only people with local knowledge can understand a media market. And only people with local knowledge can understand the news stories that are most important to you, the news consumer. Any group, whether it was the original Tribune group, whether it's the Alden group, is not going to understand that. And that's going to make it harder for them to put forth a good news product for the consumers of the Baltimore metropolitan area. That's going to be true at all of the papers that Alden has purchased as part of this Tribune deal. Now, the Baltimore Sun Guild, the union that represents Baltimore Sun employees and Baltimore Sun writers, they've been very outspoken about not selling the paper to Alden Capital. Alden Capital has a reputation, and I'm not going to speak to whether it's a deserved reputation or not, because I don't know. But they have a reputation for being a corporate raider, a group that's going to come in and slash costs and cut jobs in order to make a profit. Maybe they're going to do that with the Baltimore Sun Media Group. I don't know. What I do know is that the Baltimore Sun Guild outspokenness is going to make it very difficult for them to do business with Alden Capital. It's going to make it very hard for them to have a collaborative working relationship with the people who employ them and pay their salary with the way they have been acting and acting out towards the potential of an Alden leadership group. Now, as you know, the Baltimore Sun Guild has been actively working to try to create a new ownership group to buy the paper. They have been working with local interests, primarily Democrats, to create a nonprofit organization to buy the paper. Back in February, it was reported here by the Duckpin, exclusively by us, that the Sun and their partners in the Save Our Sun effort, including former Baltimore County Executive Ted Venetoulis, Democrat, former Democratic O'Malley staffer Damian O'Doherty, and others, were working to try to seize the Baltimore Sun by eminent domain. They had had a meeting with, at the very least, Democratic State Senator Sarah Elfreth, Anne Arundel County Executive Stewart Bainum, Democrat, Annapolis Mayor Gavin Buckley, again Democrat, to try to encourage a way to seize the paper by eminent domain, to have the state then transfer ownership to a nonprofit organization in order to run the paper. Now, of course, the group and the guild in question here, their goal was to seize the paper and hand it to them. It was an extraordinarily brazen effort to use government power to seize a private industry and give it to favored political friends. It was a brazen attempt, and as I have said, it really questions the integrity of the Baltimore Sun Guild and their reporters for so closely collaborating with Democrats. We still haven't gotten legitimate answers yet as to the nature of the Baltimore Sun Guild's relationship with Pittman, Buckley, Elfreth, O'Doherty, their clients that O'Doherty works with through his KO Public Affairs group. We still haven't had a real accounting of that yet. And there are still tremendous concerns about the journalistic integrity of what the Sun Guild has done here. Now, later on in this process, Stewart Bainum, a local businessman, a local philanthropist, he attempted to buy the Baltimore Sun Media Group independently of this sale to Alden Capital and tried to operate them as a nonprofit organization. When Tribune wasn't interested in selling directly to Bainum, he got other groups involved, other individuals involved in an attempted effort to buy up the entire Tribune company. Now, very clearly, Bainum was not successful, as Alden Capital is now in sole control of Tribune Publishing. Bainum was talking about spending $100 million of his own money in order to buy the Baltimore Sun Media Group and turn it over into a nonprofit, a primarily, again, democratically controlled nonprofit. Now, again, issues about journalistic integrity and democratic domination of a nonprofit organization that primarily covers Democrats is a big red flag. But let's talk about where we go from here. If Stewart Bainum is serious about spending $100 million to build a local news operation, to own something like the Baltimore Sun Media Group, to have a nonprofit group run it, he still has every opportunity to put his money where his mouth is. If the Baltimore Sun Media Group, Ted Venetoulis, Stewart Bainum, Damian O'Doherty, the Baltimore Sun Guild, all of these people who were so heavily invested, both their financial capital, their political capital, their street cred, all the people who were willing to help this Save Our Sun effort, there is nothing stopping them from starting a new product from scratch. If these folks are really that concerned about the degradation of quality of the Baltimore Sun under Alden Capital leadership, if they are that concerned about having journalists lose their job, and if these folks were willing to put their time, money, and effort into buying the existing paper, there's nothing stopping them from starting up a new paper. Baltimore has been a one newspaper town primarily since 1986. That's when the News American, the old conservative, I'll use air quotes here, paper in Baltimore went out of business. Now, the Sun and the Evening Sun continued as, quote, competitors, unquote, until 1995 when the Evening Sun was finally put out to pasture. But it's hard to say that a paper that is owned by the same ownership is competing with another paper owned by the same ownership. Yes, there was the Baltimore Examiner experiment back in the late 2000s, but that's hardly the same type of competition when you consider that it was a free paper, a tabloid that was delivered to people, usually without them asking for it, and not an actual commercial product that's trying to sell subscriptions and things like that. But if these folks have the courage of their convictions, if Stewart Bainum really wants to spend $100 million in order to own and operate a local news operation led by a nonprofit group, then show me the money. Show people that you are actually committed to what you said you were going to do. Put that money into a new operation. Start laying the groundwork to launch a new paper. Don't just say that you were willing to buy an existing paper. If you care that much, write the check. Form the group. Do it. And I say that not out of spite. I don't have a benefit one way or the other, whether or not Stewart Bainum and the Baltimore Sun Guild decide to form their own group. Clearly, I would have concerns about the journalistic integrity of any group that involves prominent Democrats forming a nonprofit group to try to give political cover to control a newspaper. But if they really think Baltimore is willing and Baltimore needs that local ownership group, which I tend to agree with them that they do. Baltimore needs local ownership of media, and Baltimore also needs a competitor to the Baltimore Sun. It's what's best for Baltimore. It's what's best for our region. But let's see if Bainum and his cohorts are willing to put in the work, put in the check, and put in the time in order to create a serious competitor. If they're serious, don't say that you're willing to step up and save local media in Baltimore. Show us.
This has been the Duckpin Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and download